This is just going to be a very short video. I've picked up another 3 bags of brewery waste from the local brewery, like a micro brewery, and I just wanted to show you the difference between the spent hops and the spent grain. The spent grain is the malt, and this just looks like what you might imagine it to look like, just sort of, is it going to focus? Focus? Yeah, it's just like a cereal, sort of like a grain. It's quite damp, and it's funny because some people say that brewery waste really stinks when it composts, but I think if you've got a very strong smell from the compost, you've probably just got too much green in there, and not enough carbons and not enough sort of dry woody material to create the air spaces. What left on its own, this would just go mouldy and grow a bit of fungi on top, and the bottom part would just be saturated and it wouldn't have any air, and it would just sort of go anaerobic, and that's when you get the smell. I've never noticed any real smell from it, apart from when you pick it up. It does smell a bit like a kind of stout real pub kind of thing. It's got that really malty, hoppy taste. But it's funny because if you put some of this in your car and you drive along it, you just have that associations of stale beer, and it just kind of makes you feel like you've had a couple of pints and puts you off drinking for a bit. And it's funny, so when you get some of the IPAs and things, you can tell what the brewery waste is by what they're brewing. It's a bit odd. And some of the porters and things are much darker, and they use different different grains or different hops. So that's really sort of quite fast to compost. But the spent hops, I don't know, the colour's going to come out. It's really quite bright green, really, but this really cakes together. But what I've noticed is it's terrific for fungi, even in big chunks like that in the compost. And worms will eat this as it is. You can actually dig that into the soil. It doesn't need to be composted down. It is like a source of nitrogen, pretty much, without being composted. But it does crumble up. But if left to dry out, it goes quite white, and it's almost like a chunk of MDF or something like that. So what's good to do is when you add this, just give it, sort of fork it over to mix it, and use like a compost aerator. But really, rather than just trying to aerate, you're just trying to break these lumps up and just mix it through. As I said, it's not a problem even if that goes in the compost as it is. Source of browns, I tend to use what you call arborist wood chips. So it's not just sort of chips, bark, this kind of stuff you get for like clay bark and things like that. So there's lots of twiggy bits. It's all fairly small. It's gone through quite a fine mesh screen, but you can see there's some leaves in there. Some of the brown leaves, some of the sort of green leaves. These are like evergreen leaves, so they're quite waxy. They take a bit longer to break down, and there's a mix of conifer as well, so a bit of everything on there. But what I do like is that this twiggy material does help maintain air spaces in the compost. What I tend to do, I use garden prunings, don't tend to shred stuff, keep it fairly big, just cut it down with a pair of secateurs. Really woody stuff and logs I compost elsewhere, like in hugelkultur beds. But this stuff, what I do is I add equal volume of arborist wood chip to kind of the greens, which is the brewer's waste, spent grain, and the kitchen waste and things like that. That's quite a good formula. Obviously, if you've got more green leaves in that, the ratios will be a little bit different, but overall it's easy to work out the volume. This is slower to compost, that's faster to compost. That's more dense, and this is more air in it as well, so it isn't actually, you wouldn't do it by weight or anything like that, but yeah, just on the whole 50-50 seems to be quite good. So if you can do it by bucket, just one bucket of this to one bucket of that, or one bag of that to one bag of that. But if you add it in small quantities, you can really get that really mixed up. If you tip a bag in, it's easy to get sort of layers, and when you have layers in the compost bin, you have areas which are sort of anaerobic, areas where it's got good conditions, so you have differential sort of heating. Some bits will heat up more than others, some bits will be over sort of composted in a way, and then other bits will be pretty much as you left them. But with this twiggy material, what's interesting is people talk about carbon and nitrogen ratios. I don't know what the figures are, but as a sort of guide, say you have something that starts out 300 carbon to 1 nitrogen or something like that, if it's something really slow to compost, just like a piece of oak or something like that, as you put it into the bin, almost sort of within months, that carbon nitrogen ratio is the carbon ratio is going down. So when people say fresh wood chip, that's quite high in carbon, but give it a couple of months over the winter, that's already breaking down, and so it's already losing that carbon and levelling out. So ideally you want something like 30 carbon to 1 nitrogen, and I think you can get really confused by all these different figures, and obviously different batches of prunings have different ratios anyhow, but I kind of think basically half the wet sort of green compost, kitchen waste, potato peels, veg scraps. You can put meats and things in there as well, that's all kind of classified as the same sort of green material. Coffee grinds are green as well, but when the woody stuff, I tend to go half my volume of this sort of twiggy material. If you put lots of shredded paper in there, you might think, okay, the paper's got a good carbon ratio, but it hasn't got any structure. Once I've just added that in, you can feel the air. It's quite lightweight. If you put cardboard in there, it'll be all fluffy when you first put it in, but this is quite wet, so the cardboard will absorb the excess moisture, and then that will turn into sort of paper pulp, so it doesn't do the same thing as a wood chip. And I think Nicky Scott, he's the sort of guy behind the Scotty's Hot Box. He's got his sort of community composting, and he does lots of books and things, but I've spoken to him a few times, and he always says, lots of twiggy material in there, and then that provides the sort of air spaces in the heap, and then you haven't got to worry about it all compacting down, all the air getting knocked out of it, all the microbes using up that air. So once you've got structure in there. And the other side which says this is the hot bin, which they say use a sort of a bulking agent, which they use like semi-composted bark or semi-composted wood chip, but it's quite easy to get semi-composted wood chip because all you do is store it in a bag outside and let it get weathered, and then that will break down and the worms start moving in as well. So that's a nice mix, and that makes a really nice friable soil or compost to build up soil. But bigger bits of wood chip will tend to take longer to break down, but even I'll show you some of the finished stuff, but even the finished stuff, those little tiny bits of wood chip aren't any detriment to the soil. It's not like digging in lots of fresh carbons. They're not going to take nitrogen from the surrounding soil. What happens is you get all the fungi in there, which is breaking it down, and then the plant roots are working with that fungi. The plant roots are producing the sugars and feeding the microbes and the fungi, and then it's all that soil life. Compost is a man-made term for the kind of brown, crumbly, friable stuff you put on the ground, but nature doesn't know that's finished. It will continue to break it down even further. So obviously it makes all those nutrients and all those elements back available to plants so they can grow again. And obviously then you'll get carbon dioxide as those microbes burn up that material.